At my daughter's wedding, her groom snarled at me, "You're too poor for this wedding. Leave now." I walked away with dignity, without a word. But weeks later, my $12 million investment completely bankrupted his business. He crawled back on his knees, crying and begging for forgiveness. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. "Look at yourself, Clyde." Xavier Ferguson's voice cut through the soft jazz music drifting from the estate at Cherokee Dock. He'd cornered me near the Rose Garden, away from the 200 guests celebrating my daughter Lorraine's wedding. Two of his business partners flanked him like bodyguards, their champagne flutes catching the afternoon sun. "Look at your car in the parking lot. That Toyota." He gestured toward the valet station. "Look at your suit." He reached out and tugged at my lapel with 2 fingers, as if touching something distasteful. "What is this, JCPenney? $400 maybe?" I said nothing, just watched his face, the way his nostrils flared slightly, the practiced contempt in his pale blue eyes, the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth that appeared whenever he felt superior to someone. "You're too poor for this wedding," Xavier continued, lowering his voice to a hiss. "You're ruining the atmosphere. My clients are here, important people. My parents are here. And you're sitting there by the kitchen door like some maintenance worker who wandered in looking for the service entrance." His friends chuckled on cue. One of them, a heavy man squeezed into a $3,000 suit, actually snorted into his champagne. "I'll give you $500 for a cab." Xavier reached for his wallet and pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills, holding them toward me like he was tipping a valet. "Just leave. Quietly. Tell Lorraine you had an emergency. She'll understand." I looked at him for exactly 10 seconds. I know because I counted. Each second was a photograph I was filing away. Xavier Ferguson, 38 years old, owner of Ferguson Luxury Imports, Italian furniture, French antiques for Atlanta's upper class, $4.2 million in annual revenue, according to the business journals that love to feature him. Rolex Submariner on his wrist, custom-tailored suit, hair styled with something that probably cost $50 an ounce, and not a single clue who he was actually talking to. "Remember this moment, Xavier," I said finally. My voice was calm, almost friendly. "Remember it very carefully, because you're going to regret it." His smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face, but he recovered quickly. Men like Xavier always do. "Is that supposed to be a threat?" He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "From you?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked toward the parking lot, my pace unhurried, my back straight. Behind me, I heard one of his friends say, "Can you believe that guy?" followed by laughter. I didn't look back. The gravel crunched under my shoes. A young valet rushed toward me, but I waved him off. I'd parked my own car when I arrived, back in the far corner of the lot, where the Ferraris and Mercedes wouldn't have to share space with a Camry. A 2019 Toyota Camry, silver, nothing special. Exactly the kind of car a 64-year-old retired man on a fixed income would drive. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, watching the estate through the windshield. White tents billowed gently in the March breeze. Flowers everywhere. A string quartet had replaced the jazz band on the terrace. My daughter Lorraine was in there somewhere, in her $12,000 dress, married to a man who'd just thrown her father out of her wedding. My only child. The little girl who used to sit on my lap while I explained how clock mechanisms worked. I wondered if she knew what had just happened. Probably not. Xavier was too smart for that. He'd tell her I left on my own, that I'd made some excuse, that I'd insulted him, maybe. He'd done that before, rewriting conversations after the fact. My phone buzzed, a text from Lorraine. "Dad, where are you?" "They're about to cut the cake." I typed back. "Emergency came up. Had to leave. Congratulations, sweetheart. I love you." 3 dots appeared on the screen. Then the dots disappeared. Then nothing. I sat there for another 5 minutes, watching the sun dip behind the magnolia trees. Golden light spilled across the manicured lawns. It would have been beautiful if I'd been in the mood to appreciate it. Then I pulled out my phone again and opened my banking app. The screen loaded slowly. First the login, then the verification code, then finally my account summary appeared. Current balance, 38 Tiet as Tuforspamats, Oat 9143. I stared at that number for a long time. $38,247,891.43. The 43 cents always made me smile. It was from a dividend payment last quarter. Some tech stock I'd bought years ago and mostly forgotten about. The kind of rounding error that most people wouldn't notice, but I noticed everything. Always had. I put the phone away and started the engine. The Camry hummed to life. Reliable, quiet, invisible. Just like me. Xavier Ferguson thought he knew exactly who I was. A poor old man in a cheap suit. Someone who could be dismissed with $500 and a sneer. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between looking poor and being poor. The drive home took 47 minutes. I didn't turn on the radio. Just drove through the darkening Georgia evening, watching the mansions of Buckhead give way to the suburbs, then to the modest neighborhoods of Alpharetta, until I pulled into my driveway at 2847 Hickory Lane, a one-story house, 1,200 square feet, worth $185,000 on a good day. The lawn was neat. The paint was fresh. The garage door squeaked when I opened it. This was where Clyde Allen lived. The man Xavier Ferguson thought he understood completely. I went straight to my workshop in the garage. 47 antique clocks lined the walls and workbenches. Grandfather clocks in the corners, mantel clocks on the shelves, pocket watches under glass domes. The familiar smell of machine oil and brass polish greeted me like an old friend. The most valuable piece was a Patek Philippe pocket watch from 1892, worth around $40,000. It had stopped running 2 weeks ago. Something wrong with the escapement. I picked it up and carried it to my workbench. As my fingers found the tiny screws, my mind drifted backward to the first time I'd met Xavier Ferguson almost 2 years ago. Lorraine had brought him to dinner, here, in this house. I'd cooked steaks on the grill, opened a good bottle of wine, tried to make a good impression. Xavier had walked through the front door and immediately started looking around. Not the way a guest looks, curious, appreciative, the way an appraiser looks, calculating. "Nice place," he'd said, but his tone said the opposite. Later, when they were leaving, I was standing on the porch in the shadows. I heard him whisper to Lorraine in the driveway, "Your father lives like a janitor." I'd pretended not to hear. Told myself it didn't matter. But I remembered. Then there was Christmas, the Ferguson family gathering in Buckhead. Eugene Ferguson, Xavier's father, a retired banker, had greeted me with a limp handshake. His wife Patricia hadn't greeted me at all. Xavier had handed me a gift with a knowing smile. A book, How to Become a Millionaire Before 30. He'd inscribed it himself. "Never too late to dream, Clyde." Everyone laughed. Eugene chuckled into his scotch. Even Lorraine smiled, though something flickered across her face. Embarrassment, guilt. I'd thanked him politely, brought the book home, never opened it, but never threw it away either. Some reminders are worth keeping. The last memory was the sharpest. Lorraine's birthday 3 months ago. A party at Aria, an upscale restaurant downtown. I'd arrived with a gift, a vintage brooch from an estate sale. 18-karat gold, Art Deco design, $800. Xavier had intercepted me at the entrance, all smiles for the crowd. Then leaning closer, his voice dropping but not quite enough. "I hope you can at least chip in for flowers this time. We're not running a charity here." Loud enough for the hostess to hear. Loud enough for the couple at the nearby table to exchange uncomfortable glances. I'd said nothing. Handed over my gift. Stayed for exactly 1 hour, then left. Now, sitting in my garage with the Patek Philippe in my hands, I finally understood the pattern. This wasn't random cruelty. Xavier was too smart for that. Every insult, every jab, every public humiliation over the past 2 years had been carefully calculated, designed to accomplish one goal: separate me from my daughter, make her ashamed of her poor father, make her choose. And tonight, at her wedding, he'd made his final move. The watch ticked suddenly in my hands. I looked down, startled. The escapement. I'd fixed it without realizing. My fingers had found the problem while my mind worked on something else entirely. I set the watch aside and pulled my laptop from its shelf. Ferguson Luxury Imports, the company Xavier loved to brag about. 3 hours of research, public records, court filings, supplier databases, business registrations. Nothing illegal, just thorough. The kind of research I'd done 1,000 times when running my own company. And what I found was interesting. Xavier's empire was built on sand, actually worse than sand. Debt, delay tactics, and suppliers losing patience. He owed $2.8 million to First National Bank of Georgia, 60 to 90 days behind on payments to Italian vendors, 2 demand letters from attorneys in 6 months, 1 good push, and the whole thing would collapse. I closed the laptop and picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts. Jerry Whitfield, my financial manager for 15 years, the only person who knew what I'd built and sold over 4 decades. He answered on the second ring. "Jerry," I said, "I need a corporate attorney, the best you know, someone who handles acquisitions, debt restructuring, hostile transactions." A pause. "Clyde, it's almost midnight. What's going on?" "Everything's fine." I looked at the Patek Philippe, now running perfectly. "I also need someone who investigates. Quietly. Someone who finds things people want hidden." "A private investigator?" "Yes." Another pause. "Clyde, this doesn't sound like you." I smiled in the darkness of my garage, surrounded by the soft ticking of 47 antique clocks. "Let's just say I'm considering an investment," I told him, a very personal one. 8 days after the wedding, I walked into the offices of Lawson & Associates on Peachtree Street. The building was old Atlanta money. Marble floors, brass fixtures, the kind of understated elegance that whispered success rather than screaming it. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect posture and a practiced smile, looked at my clothes and hesitated for just a moment before asking if I had an appointment. I did. Adam Lawson's office was on the 8th floor. Corner suite, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the city that probably added 20% to his hourly rate. He was 52, gray at the temples with the kind of handshake that said he'd spent decades dealing with people who had money and problems in equal measure. "Mr. Allen," he gestured to a leather chair across from his desk, "Jerry Whitfield speaks highly of you, says you're a man who knows what he wants." "I'm a man who knows what he doesn't want," I said, settling into the chair. "And right now, I don't want to make a bad investment." Lawson's eyebrow rose slightly. "Jerry mentioned something about your son-in-law's company?" I'd rehearsed this part. The key was keeping it simple, businesslike, no emotion, no hint of what was actually churning beneath the surface. "My daughter recently married. Her husband owns a furniture import business, Ferguson Luxury Imports. He's been suggesting I invest in the company. Before I commit any capital, I'd like a complete picture of what I'd be buying into." "Due diligence," Lawson nodded approvingly. "Smart. Most people don't bother until after they've signed the check. I've signed enough checks in my life to know better." We talked for an hour. I explained what I'd found in my preliminary research. The debt, the supplier issues, the gaps in the public filings that suggested more problems lurking beneath the surface. Lawson listened, took notes on a yellow legal pad, and didn't ask why a supposedly retired man was so interested in his son-in-law's finances. Good lawyers know when not to ask questions. "For a thorough investigation," he said finally, setting down his pen, "I'd recommend bringing in a specialist, someone who can access information that's technically public but practically invisible. Bank relationships, supplier contracts, customs declarations, the kind of details that don't show up in a Google search. You have someone in mind?" "Zach Thompson, former Atlanta PD, now private. Expensive but thorough. If there's something to find, he'll find it." I met Thompson 3 days later at a coffee shop in Midtown. He was younger than I expected, 45 maybe, with the watchful eyes of someone who'd spent years looking for things people tried to hide. We sat in a corner booth, away from the windows and the other customers. $15,000 plus expenses, he said after I'd explained what I needed. 2 to 3 weeks for a full workup. Financial records, supplier relationships, any legal issues pending or settled. If there's dirt, I'll find it. And if there isn't? Thompson smiled, a thin, knowing smile. There's always dirt, Mr. Allen. The question is how deep you have to dig. I wrote him a check on the spot. While I waited for Thompson's report, life continued its strange new rhythm. I went to the hardware store, mowed my lawn, worked on my clocks. To anyone watching, a neighbor, perhaps, or the mailman, I was exactly what I appeared to be, a quiet retiree filling his days with small tasks and smaller ambitions. But my mind was elsewhere, running calculations, playing out scenarios, like a chess game where I could already see 5 moves ahead, but needed to wait for my opponent to make his move first. On April 2nd, my phone rang. The screen showed Lorraine's name. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Part of me had been expecting this call, dreading it. "Dad." Her voice was cool, formal, the voice she used with difficult vendors, not family. "We need to talk about the wedding." "All right." "Xavier told me what happened. He said you made a scene, that you insulted his friends and then stormed out without even saying goodbye." I felt my jaw tighten but kept my voice steady. "Is that what he said?" "He was very upset, Dad. This was supposed to be our special day and you couldn't just be supportive? For once?" The word stung more than I wanted to admit. But I'd learned a long time ago that the truth doesn't defend itself. It just waits. "Lorraine," I cut her off gently, "I want you to do something for me." "What?" "Ask Xavier exactly what happened, word for word, and watch his face when he answers." Silence on the line. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her frowning. What's that supposed to mean? It means what it means. Ask him. Look at his eyes when he tells you the story. You'll know if he's telling the truth. More silence. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, less certain. "Dad, I don't understand what's happening." "Neither do I, sweetheart. But I'm starting to figure it out." I hung up before she could respond. 3 days later, April 5th, Thompson called. "Mr. Allen." His voice had an edge of excitement I hadn't heard before. "You're not going to believe what I found." I sat down in my workshop, surrounded by the soft ticking of 47 clocks. "Try me. Your son-in-law's company, Ferguson Luxury Imports. It's a house of cards. One strong wind, and the whole thing comes tumbling down." The meeting took place in Lawson's conference room. Thompson had brought a box of documents, contracts, bank statements, shipping manifests, emails. He spread them across the mahogany table like a surgeon laying out instruments. "Let's start with the debt," he said. "Ferguson Luxury Imports has a credit line with First National Bank of Georgia, $2.8 million, secured against business assets and Xavier Ferguson's personal guarantee." I picked up the bank statement. The numbers told a story of a company living beyond its means. "He's missed 2 payments in the last quarter," Thompson continued. "The bank sent a formal warning letter 3 weeks ago. 1 more missed payment, and they can call in the entire loan." Lawson leaned forward. "That's significant. A loan call would trigger immediate repayment demands from other creditors." "It gets better." Thompson pulled out another stack of papers. His main suppliers, 3 Italian companies, Mobile Toscana, Veneto Designs, and Artisan Roma. All 3 are owed money, 60 to 90 days past due on invoices totaling $247,000. I studied the invoices. The payment terms were clear. Net 30 days. Xavier was stretching that to 3 months. Classic cash flow management for a company in trouble. "There's more." Thompson's voice dropped. "This is where it gets interesting." He produced a folder of customs declarations, import forms, shipping manifests from Italian ports. I compared the declared values on his customs forms to the actual invoices from suppliers. Thompson pointed to a column of numbers. "He's underreporting by 20 to 25%, consistently, for at least 2 years." I understood immediately. Customs fraud. "Federal crime," Lawson confirmed. "Duty evasion. If CBP ever audits him, he's looking at massive fines, possibly criminal charges." I sat back in my chair, processing. Xavier Ferguson, the man who'd called me too poor for his wedding, was running a company on borrowed time and borrowed money, while committing federal crimes to keep it afloat. The irony was almost beautiful. "How much is the debt worth?" I asked Lawson. "If the bank wanted to sell it?" Lawson exchanged a glance with Thompson. "Right now? The bank would probably take 90 cents on the dollar, maybe 85. They'd rather have cash than a problem loan. And if the company started showing more stress, lost a major supplier, for instance, then the value drops. Significantly. Banks hate uncertainty. If Ferguson starts looking like a serious default risk, They'd sell the debt for 50, 60 cents on the dollar just to get it off their books. I stood and walked to the window. Atlanta stretched out below, glass towers and old brick, wealth and ambition layered on top of each other. I want you to do 2 things, I said, not turning around. First, create a holding company. Register it in Delaware. Name it Hickory Holdings, LLC. I heard Lawson writing. And the second thing? Find me a contact at First National Bank. Someone in their distressed assets department. Someone who can make a deal happen quietly. A long pause. Mr. Allen, may I ask what you're planning? I turned from the window. Xavier Ferguson thinks money is about showing off. Big houses, fancy cars, expensive suits. I smiled. I'm going to teach him what money is actually for. Lawson studied me for a moment. Whatever he saw in my face made him nod slowly. Hickory Holdings, he said. I'll have the paperwork ready by end of week. And I know someone at First National. Former colleague. Very discreet. I walked to the table and picked up my checkbook. Wrote out a check for $250,000. Lawson's retainer, Thompson's fee, and initial capital for whatever came next. As I handed it over, Lawson looked at the amount, and then at me. You understand what might happen here. If this plays out the way I think you're planning, your son-in-law could lose everything. I thought about the wedding, the rose garden, $500 bills held out like I was a beggar. He already lost everything that mattered, I said. He just doesn't know it yet. Outside, the April sun was warm on my face as I walked to my car. The Camry waited patiently in the parking garage, unimpressive and unremarkable, just like me. But behind the wheel, driving home through Atlanta traffic, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, that had burned itself out days ago. Not even satisfaction. Purpose. Xavier Ferguson had spent 2 years trying to separate me from my daughter, trying to make her ashamed of where she came from. And now I knew exactly how fragile his empire really was. The next few weeks would require patience, timing, precision, like restoring a delicate watch mechanism. One wrong move and the whole thing falls apart. But if I did it right, 1 breath, Thompson had said, 1 breath and the house of cards collapses. I intended to be that breath. April 20th, a Tuesday, the day I became Xavier Ferguson's largest creditor. The wire transfer went through at 9:47 a.m. $2,240,000. 80 cents on the dollar for Ferguson Luxury Imports' entire debt to First National Bank of Georgia. The bank was happy to unload a problem loan. They got clean cash and a clean balance sheet. I got leverage. The kind of leverage that Xavier Ferguson couldn't buy with all his Italian furniture and French antiques combined. Lawson called me that afternoon. I was sitting in my garage, the spring sunlight filtering through the dusty windows, surrounded by the quiet ticking of my clocks. It's done, he said. Hickory Holdings, LLC, now owns the note. All $2.8 million of it. The bank's legal department finalized the transfer this morning. I was working on an 1890 Ansonia mantel clock, a beautiful piece with a damaged mainspring. The spring was worn, stretched beyond its tolerance, needed replacing entirely. What's Xavier's payment status? He missed another installment last week, 3rd one in 4 months. Under the original loan terms, that triggers an acceleration clause, meaning the new owner of the debt, that's you through Hickory Holdings, can demand full repayment at any time. Legally, you could call in the entire $2.8 million tomorrow morning. I set down my screwdriver and looked at the clock's exposed mechanism. All those tiny gears, each one dependent on the others. Remove one piece, and the whole thing stops. Not yet, I said. Let's give him some room to breathe, just enough rope to hang himself. The next phase required more finesse. Xavier's company depended on 3 Italian suppliers: Mobili, Toscana, Veneto Designs, and Artisan Roma. Between them, they provided 90% of his inventory: the hand-carved tables, the leather sofas, the crystal chandeliers that his wealthy clients expected. Without those suppliers, Ferguson Luxury Imports was just an empty warehouse with a fancy logo. Lawson made the calls. He presented himself as representing a new American distribution company, Atlantic Furniture Partners, another shell corporation I'd created, interested in exclusive importing arrangements, better payment terms, higher volume commitments. Reliable, guaranteed cash flow instead of Ferguson's perpetual 60-day delays. 2 of the 3 companies were very interested. Suppliers, after all, want to be paid. It's a simple concept that Xavier had apparently never grasped. Mobili Toscana is in, Lawson reported a week later. They've agreed to pause all shipments to Ferguson until he clears his outstanding balance, $87,000. And Veneto Designs? Same story. They're owed $62,000. They've agreed to hold all new orders until payment in full. Their operations manager was quite enthusiastic about working with Atlantic Furniture Partners instead. Only Artisan Roma remained loyal to Xavier, for now. But loyalty in business lasts exactly as long as the checks keep clearing. I waited. Patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon. Every day that passed, Xavier's inventory grew thinner. Every day, his customers waited longer for orders that weren't coming. Every day, the pressure built like steam in a sealed container. On April 28th, Lorraine came to visit. I heard her car pull into the driveway, a BMW X5 that Xavier had leased for her. Monthly payments probably higher than my entire mortgage. She sat in the driver's seat for a full minute before getting out. I watched from the kitchen window, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way she gripped the steering wheel even after the engine was off. When she finally knocked, I opened the door with a smile. "Sweetheart, this is a surprise." She looked tired. Dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Her hair, usually styled with professional precision, was pulled back in a hasty ponytail. "Dad, we need to talk." I led her to the living room. She perched on the edge of the couch like she might need to flee at any moment. Her hands kept moving, adjusting her sleeve, touching her necklace, clasping and unclasping in her lap. "Xavier told me something," she said, "about the wedding." "Did he?" He said. She hesitated, swallowed hard. "He said you asked him for money, that you wanted to borrow from him at the reception, and when he said no, you got angry and stormed out." I let the silence stretch between us, watched her face. She wasn't looking at me, couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Is that what he told you?" I asked finally, keeping my voice neutral. "Dad, I need to know the truth. Did you ask Xavier for money?" I leaned back in my chair, thought about telling her everything. The rose garden, the $500 held out like a tip, the contempt in her husband's eyes as he ordered her father to leave like a servant who'd overstayed his welcome. But not yet. The truth would come out eventually. It always does. "Lorraine," I said gently, "do you really believe I would do that? Ask your husband for money at your own wedding?" She finally looked at me. I could see the doubt swimming in her eyes, the confusion. She wanted to believe Xavier, needed to believe him. But somewhere underneath, in the part of her that was still my daughter, she knew something didn't add up. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she whispered. "Then don't believe anything yet," I said. "Watch. Listen. Pay attention to what people do, not just what they say. The truth has a way of revealing itself." She left an hour later, still uncertain, still torn, but I'd planted a seed. 2 days after that, April 30th, Xavier Ferguson received a certified letter from Italy, Mobili Toscana, informing him that their contract, worth $340,000 in annual business, was suspended effective immediately until he paid his outstanding balance of $87,000. I imagined his face when he read it, the confusion first, then the slow, creeping realization, then the panic setting in like ice water in his veins. The first domino had fallen. The call came at 6:15 a.m. on May 2nd. Thompson, my investigator, had sources everywhere, including, it seemed, inside Xavier Ferguson's own office building. "He's in full crisis mode," Thompson reported. "Called his father last night around 9 p.m., begged for $100,000 to cover the Italian suppliers. And Eugene Ferguson said no, told Xavier to sell something. The boat, maybe, or some furniture from that Buckhead mansion. Said he doesn't have that kind of cash lying around." The conversation got heated. I poured myself a cup of coffee and smiled. How heated exactly? Xavier threw his phone across his office, cracked the screen on the wall. His assistant heard everything through the door. The image was deeply satisfying. Xavier Ferguson, the man who wore $3,000 suits, and looked down on anyone who couldn't match his wardrobe. Reduced to screaming at his father for money, but I wasn't done, not even close. May 15th, the second domino. Hickory Holdings, my company, though Xavier didn't know that yet, sent a formal demand letter to Ferguson Luxury Imports. Certified mail, return receipt requested. The language was precise, drafted by Lawson himself. Pursuant to Section 4.2 of the credit agreement, dated March 15, 2023, the note holder hereby demands full repayment of the outstanding principal balance of $2,800,000, plus accrued interest of $47,832.19, within 90 days of receipt of this notice. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action to recover all amounts owed, including seizure of collateral assets. I pictured Xavier opening that envelope. The confusion first? Who was Hickory Holdings? He'd never heard that name before. First National Bank had held his loan for 2 years. When had they sold it? Then the fear. $2.8 million. 90 days. No way to pay. His suppliers had abandoned him, his inventory was drying up, and now someone he'd never met was demanding everything he owed. His face probably turned the color of old oatmeal. His hands probably trembled as he reached for his phone. He called his lawyer first, a man named Patterson, who charged $400 an hour. Patterson did his research and called Xavier back that same afternoon. The company is legitimate, Patterson told him, registered in Delaware. The debt sale was legal. Banks sell problem loans all the time. You're in technical default because of the missed payments. But who owns this company? Who's behind it? Delaware doesn't require public disclosure of LLC members. Whoever's behind Hickory Holdings went to considerable lengths to stay anonymous. Legally anonymous. I could almost hear Xavier's mind racing, searching for enemies. Business rivals he'd undercut. Former employees he'd fired. Anyone who might have the money and motive to destroy him. He never once thought of the old man in the modest house, the one he'd thrown out of his own daughter's wedding for being too poor. May 25th, the third domino. Hickory Holdings filed a formal lawsuit in Superior Court of Fulton County, Georgia. Case number 2025-CV-0847. Ferguson Luxury Imports, LLC, defendant, seeking full repayment plus interest, legal fees, and costs. Request for expedited judgment. Court filings are public record. Anyone can look them up online. And in Atlanta's tight-knit business community, people talk. The call from Atlanta Business Chronicle came 3 days later. A reporter named Michelle Hartley, asking Xavier for comment on the lawsuit and reports of financial difficulties at Ferguson Luxury Imports. Xavier hung up on her. The story ran anyway without his comment, which made him look guilty and evasive. That evening, my phone rang. Lorraine. Dad. Her voice sounded different, tight, frightened. Xavier says someone is attacking his company. He says there's a lawsuit filed against him. He says someone's deliberately trying to destroy everything he's built. I kept my voice carefully neutral. That sounds very serious. He thinks it's coordinated, someone buying his debt, pressuring his suppliers, filing lawsuits. Dad, he's scared. Really scared. I've never seen him like this. I let the silence stretch between us. Do you know anything about this? Lorraine asked quietly. Me? I allowed a note of genuine surprise into my voice. Sweetheart, I'm a retired man living on a fixed income. What could I possibly know about business lawsuits and debt purchases? She was quiet for a long moment. He's been different lately, she finally said. Angry all the time. He threw a whiskey glass against the wall last night, shattered it, and he keeps saying someone's out to get him, but he doesn't know who. He's making lists of enemies. It's like he's becoming paranoid. That must be very difficult for you. It is. Her voice cracked slightly. Dad, I'm scared too. I don't know what's happening to my life. I softened my tone. Whatever satisfaction I felt watching Xavier squirm, Lorraine was still my daughter. If you need anything, I said, I'm here. Always. You know that. After she hung up, I walked to my garage. The Patek Philippe sat on its stand, keeping perfect time. I picked it up and held it to my ear, listening to the steady tick-tick-tick of the escapement. Patience. Precision. Every piece in its proper place. Xavier Ferguson had no idea who was behind Hickory Holdings, No idea that the poor old man he'd dismissed with $500 had just wrapped his hands around everything Xavier owned. And the best part? I was just getting started. June 1st. The article hit the Atlanta Business Chronicle website at 7 a.m. Ferguson Luxury Imports faces lawsuit. Court documents reveal millions in debt. I read it over breakfast, savoring every word along with my morning coffee. The reporter had done her homework. She'd pulled the court filings, interviewed industry sources, even found a former employee willing to talk about persistent cash flow problems and delayed paychecks that sometimes stretched for weeks. The photograph they'd used was particularly fitting. Xavier at some charity gala last year, champagne in hand, grinning like a man without a care in the world. The contrast between that image and his current reality was almost poetic. By noon, Thompson reported that 3 clients had canceled orders totaling $120,000. Nobody wants to pay a $10,000 deposit to a company that might not exist next month. Rich people don't get rich by throwing money into sinking ships. By the end of the week, that number had grown to 300,000 in lost orders. June 5th brought another gift. Artisan Roma, the last of Xavier's 3 Italian suppliers, the only one that had stayed loyal through the initial crisis. Sent their own termination letter. They'd seen the news coverage, they'd done their own research, and they'd decided they couldn't risk another American partner who might not pay his bills. Thompson sent me a photo of Xavier's warehouse in Norcross. It told the whole story without a single word. 6 months ago, that 15,000 square foot space had been packed floor to ceiling with Italian leather sofas, hand-carved dining tables, crystal chandeliers wrapped in protective cloth. Now, half empty, maybe less. The furniture that remained was gathering dust, unsold inventory that represented cash Xavier desperately needed but couldn't access because there were no customers left to buy it. June 10th, the bank that held Xavier's business checking account froze his corporate credit card. Your credit rating has been downgraded, they informed him in a form letter that probably took all of 30 seconds to generate. We're limiting your credit exposure until your financial situation stabilizes. I imagined him getting that call, the color draining from his face, the realization that even his own bank, the institution that was supposed to support him through difficult times, had lost faith in his ability to survive. That afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was Atlanta. Mr. Allen, this is Eugene Ferguson, Xavier's father. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a small smile that he couldn't see. Eugene, this is unexpected. I know we're not close. His voice was stiff, formal, the voice of a man who wasn't accustomed to asking anyone for help. But I'm calling about Xavier. His business is in serious trouble. I've heard something about that. Read the article this morning, actually. He's drowning, Clyde. Someone is systematically destroying him. The debt, the suppliers, now this lawsuit, and the press coverage. He can't survive it. A pause. I was wondering if you might know anyone who could help. An investor, perhaps. Someone with capital who might be willing to step in. The audacity was almost beautiful. Eugene Ferguson, the man who'd given me a limp handshake at Christmas dinner, who'd watched his son humiliate me at every opportunity without saying a word, was now calling me to ask if I could save his boy. Eugene, I said slowly, letting the silence stretch. I'm a retired man on a fixed income. I live in a modest house worth less than your son's car. I drive a Toyota. What could I possibly do to help? Silence on the line. I could almost hear him processing, reassessing, trying to reconcile what he thought he knew about me with the limitations I was describing. I understand, he finally said. His voice was cold now, disappointed, perhaps even a little suspicious. I'm sorry to have bothered you. He hung up without saying goodbye, just like his son would have. That evening I sat in my garage, working on an 1885 Gustav Becker wall clock that a collector in Savannah had sent me for restoration. The mechanism was intricate, over 300 individual parts working in perfect harmony. One misaligned gear, one worn spring, one loose screw, and the whole thing stops, like a business, like a carefully constructed life, like Xavier Ferguson's empire of show and pretense, My phone buzzed. A text from Thompson. Xavier just discovered something interesting. He's been researching Hickory Holdings all day. Found the attorney of record, Adam Lawson. Now he's searching Lawson online. Found a photo from the Atlanta Restoration Society Gala, 2022. Guess who's standing right next to Lawson in the picture? I smiled and typed back. Let me guess. Some old man who drives a Toyota. Thompson's response came immediately. Bingo! Your son-in-law just figured out who's been buying his debt. He looks like he's seen a ghost. I set down my phone and picked up the Gustav Becker's mainspring, held it up to the light. Perfect tension, perfect balance. Xavier Ferguson had finally figured out who was destroying him. Now things would get truly interesting. Xavier didn't waste time. By June 12th, he'd done what any desperate man with resources would do. He'd started digging deeper. Thompson kept me informed of his progress. Xavier had found the newspaper archives, the 2017 article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about the sale of Allen Distribution Network. The headline, Local Entrepreneur Sells Logistics Empire to National Giant. The article didn't mention the sale price. That information was private. But Xavier was smart enough to do the math. A distribution network with 47 warehouses across the Southeast, sold to a Fortune 500 logistics company. Even a conservative estimate put the number in the tens of millions. His father-in-law wasn't poor. His father-in-law was rich, possibly richer than Xavier had ever been. And now that father-in-law was methodically taking everything Xavier owned. The confrontation came on June 15th. Not with me. Xavier went to Lorraine first. Tried to turn my own daughter against me. She called me that evening, her voice shaking. Dad, Xavier showed me an article from 2017 about you selling a company. I said nothing. Let her continue. He says you're wealthy, that you've been hiding it all these years, that you're the one behind Hickory Holdings, behind the lawsuit, behind everything. Her breath caught. He says you're deliberately trying to destroy him. What do you think? I asked quietly. I don't know what to think anymore. The words burst out of her. My father lives in a tiny house. He drives a Camry. He wears clothes from department stores. None of this makes any sense. Lorraine, I said calmly, do you remember what Xavier told you about the wedding? That I asked him for money at the reception? Silence. Do you remember the book he gave me at Christmas? How to Become a Millionaire Before 30. Do you remember all the times he made comments about my house, my car, my clothes? In front of you. In front of his parents. In front of strangers? Still silence, but I could hear her breathing fast and shallow. Ask yourself this. Would a poor man spend 2 years being publicly humiliated by his son-in-law without fighting back? Or would he wait, and watch, and plan? I hung up before she could respond. Some truths need time to sink in. Xavier's counterattack came on June 20th. His lawyer Patterson filed a lawsuit against Hickory Holdings in Superior Court. The allegations were creative. Tortious interference with business relationships, conspiracy to defraud, intentional infliction of economic harm. Lawson called me with the news. I could hear the amusement in his voice. He's claiming we coordinated with his suppliers to destroy his business, that the whole thing is a personal vendetta. Is any of it provable? Not even close. We bought a debt that was legally for sale. We exercised our rights under the loan agreement. We didn't force his suppliers to do anything. They made their own decisions based on his payment history. Lawson paused. His case is garbage. No evidence. No witnesses. Just desperation. How long to dismiss it? 48 hours. He was right. On June 22nd, Patterson's lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. The judge's ruling was blunt. The plaintiff has failed to demonstrate any actionable wrongdoing. The acquisition of commercial debt through legal channels and the exercise of contractual rights do not constitute tortious interference. Xavier Ferguson had tried to fight back. He'd swung with everything he had, and he'd missed completely. But I wasn't finished yet. June 28th. 2 events carefully timed. First, Xavier Ferguson filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in federal court. Ferguson Luxury Imports was officially insolvent. The company he'd bragged about at cocktail parties was dead. Second, Thompson, acting on my instructions, sent an anonymous package to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Inside were copies of Xavier's import declarations for the past 3 years, alongside the original invoices from his Italian suppliers. The discrepancy was obvious: 20 to 25% undervaluation on customs forms, consistently across hundreds of shipments. Duty evasion on a massive scale, a federal crime. I didn't know exactly when the investigation would start. Federal agencies move at their own pace, but I knew it would start, and when it did, Xavier would have much bigger problems than bankruptcy. That evening I sat in my garage and looked at the Patek Philippe, the watch that had stopped running the night of the wedding, the watch I'd fixed while my mind worked on a different kind of problem. Xavier Ferguson had called me too poor for his wedding, had offered me $500 to leave, like I was hired help who'd overstayed my welcome. Now his company was bankrupt. His lawsuit had been thrown out of court, and federal investigators would soon be examining every customs form he'd ever signed. The Patek Philippe ticked steadily in my palm. Perfect time, perfect precision, just like my plan. July 15th, a Tuesday afternoon, hot and humid the way only Georgia summers can be. I was in my garage, working on a particularly stubborn 1878 Howard banjo clock, when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Not Lorraine's BMW. This engine sounded different, rougher, less maintained. I set down my tools and walked to the window. Xavier Ferguson was getting out of a rental car. A mid-sized sedan, nothing fancy. His Porsche must have been repossessed along with everything else. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His suit, once crisp and expensive, was wrinkled, the collar slightly askew. He'd lost weight, maybe 15 pounds, and it showed in his face. The confident swagger I remembered from the wedding was gone, replaced by the shuffling gait of someone who'd been beaten down by life. I opened the front door before he could knock. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The last time we'd stood this close was in the rose garden at the estate at Cherokee Dock, when he'd held out $500 and told me I was too poor for his wedding. 4 months ago. It felt like a lifetime. Clyde, his voice cracked on my name. I know it was you. I said nothing, just watched him, the way I'd watched him count out those $100 bills. Hickory Holdings, the debt purchase, the suppliers, all of it. He swallowed hard. I know you're behind everything. Do you? I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. And how did you figure that out? The photo, you and Lawson at that charity event. And then I found the article about your company, Allen Distribution. You sold it for, I don't even know how much. Tens of millions? I smiled slightly. 47 million, actually. But who's counting? Xavier's face went pale. Whatever number he'd imagined, it wasn't that high. You've been rich this whole time, he whispered. All those years I was... And you just let me. Let you what, Xavier? Mock me? Humiliate me in front of my own daughter? Give me self-help books as Christmas presents? I stepped out onto the porch, and he actually took a step backward. I let you show me exactly who you were, and then I showed you who I was. His composure cracked. The confident mask he'd worn for years, the successful businessman, the man who judged everyone by their net worth, crumbled right there on my front lawn. Please! The word came out as a broken whisper. Clyde, please! The federal investigation, they found everything. The customs declarations. They're talking about criminal charges. I could go to prison. You committed federal crimes, Xavier. That tends to have consequences. But you reported me. You sent them the documents. Someone sent them documents. Anonymous tip. Happens all the time. I kept my voice level. The real question is, why were there documents to send? Why were you committing fraud in the first place? He had no answer for that. What else have you lost? I asked, though I already knew. Everything. The word came out hollow. The company's gone. Bankruptcy court is liquidating what's left. The house on Magnolia. The bank's taking it next month. My parents won't speak to me. My father called me a disgrace to the family name. He laughed bitterly. And Lorraine filed for divorce last week. That last part I hadn't known. My daughter hadn't told me. She found out what really happened at the wedding, Xavier continued. What I really said to you. How I really treated you. She said she'd been blind, but now she could see. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. You won, Clyde. You destroyed me. Is that what you wanted to hear? I considered the question seriously. Was this what I wanted? What I wanted? I said slowly, was for you to understand something you never bothered to learn. What? That a man's worth isn't measured by his suit, or his car, or the size of his house. That respect isn't something you can buy. It's something you earn. And that when you spend 2 years systematically humiliating someone, trying to separate them from their own daughter, there might be consequences you never imagined. Xavier stood there, broken and beaten, waiting for whatever came next. I'm not obligated to help you, I said. After everything you did, I could walk back inside, close this door, and let the federal prosecutors have you. 2 to 5 years in prison, probably. Your life would be over. His face went gray. But I'm not going to do that. I paused, letting the words sink in. I'm going to give you one chance. One. And if you take it, you might survive this. What do I have to do? I told him. The conditions were simple. First, a full confession, on video, in front of the family. Every insult, every manipulation, every lie he'd told about me. The recording would stay private. I had no interest in public humiliation, but it would exist as a permanent record of who he really was. Second, full cooperation with the federal investigation. No fighting the charges. No expensive lawyers trying to find loopholes. Accept responsibility. Cooperate completely, and take whatever deal the prosecutors offered. In exchange, I would withdraw the civil lawsuit. I would instruct Lawson to release the debt claim. It wouldn't save his company. That was already dead. But it would remove one of the crushing weights that was dragging him under. Xavier listened to all of it. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Why? He finally asked. After everything I did to you, why would you offer me anything? I thought about the question. About the Patek Philippe watch in my garage, running perfectly now. About broken things that could be fixed if someone had the patience and skill. Because I'm not you, Xavier. I don't destroy people for sport. I defend what's mine, and I punish those who try to hurt my family. But I don't kick a man when he's already down. I met his eyes. You have 1 week to decide. I walked back inside and closed the door. September 20th, a Saturday afternoon, crisp and clear. They gathered in my living room, the same modest room that Xavier had once dismissed as a janitor's quarters. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Xavier sat in a straight-back chair facing a camera on a tripod. He'd accepted my terms, of course. He had no choice. The alternative was prison and complete destruction. Lorraine sat on the couch, her divorce finalized 2 weeks earlier. She'd moved to an apartment in Midtown, started looking for a new job, away from the wreckage of Ferguson luxury imports. We'd had dinner twice in the past month. Awkward at first, but getting easier with each conversation. Eugene Ferguson was there too, along with his wife, Patricia. They'd driven up from Buckhead in their Mercedes, the first time either had set foot in my humble home. Eugene looked older than I remembered, his banker's confidence replaced by something quieter, something that might have been shame. Whenever you're ready, I said to Xavier. He took a breath, looked at the camera, and began. The confession took 47 minutes. He described everything in detail. The wedding, what he'd really said in the rose garden, the $500 held out like a tip, the order to leave my own daughter's celebration, the 2 years of systematic humiliation, the book at Christmas with its mocking inscription, the comments at every family gathering, the lies he'd told Lorraine to turn her against me. He also confessed to the business fraud, the customs declarations, the systematic undervaluation of imports to avoid duties, all of it, documented and detailed in his own words. When he finished, his face was wet with tears. Not for what he'd done, I suspected, but for what it had cost him. I stopped the recording. This stays in the family, I said. It's not for the public. It's not for revenge. It's so everyone here knows exactly what happened and why. Lorraine was crying quietly. Patricia Ferguson looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Eugene stared at his son with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment, certainly, but perhaps something else underneath. October 15th. Xavier stood before a federal judge and accepted a plea agreement. 2 years of probation, a $340,000 fine, a 5-year ban from the import-export industry. He avoided prison. Barely. True to my word, I had Lawson withdraw the civil lawsuit the same day. The debt Hickory Holdings held, the crushing weight that had helped bring him down, was released. Not forgiven exactly, but no longer actively pursuing him. It was more mercy than he deserved, but it was the right thing to do. October 28th, the last Saturday of the month. Lorraine came to visit, not the defensive Lorraine who'd accused me of abandoning her wedding, but someone softer, someone who'd had time to process everything that had happened and come to terms with it. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee, talking about her new job search and her plans for the future. Normal father-daughter conversation, the kind we hadn't had in years. "Dad," she said finally, setting down her cup, "why didn't you ever tell me? About the company, the money, any of it?" I considered the question carefully. I'd been expecting it for months. "When I sold Allen Distribution," I said, "I made a decision. I'd spent 40 years building that company, working 60-hour weeks, missing holidays and birthdays. And in the end, I had a lot of money and not much else. So you just hid it?" I simplified, kept the house because I like it here, kept my clocks because they make me happy. Let go of everything else. I smiled. The money's still there. But I didn't want it to define me, and I didn't want it to define how people treated me. Lorraine was quiet. "Xavier treated you like garbage because he thought you were poor." "Yes, and you let him. For 2 years, just watching." "I was watching you too, sweetheart. Watching how he influenced you, hoping you'd see through him on your own." I reached across and took her hand. "You didn't. So I had to show you." She squeezed my fingers. "I'm sorry, Dad. For believing him, for not asking questions, for being embarrassed. You don't need to apologize for being young and in love." I stood. "Come with me. I want to show you something." I led her to the garage, my workshop filled with 47 clocks I'd collected and restored over the years. "See this one?" I picked up the Patek Philippe from its stand. "I was working on this the night of your wedding. It had stopped running. I fixed it while deciding what to do about Xavier." Lorraine held the watch up to the light. The gold case gleamed. "It's beautiful," she said. "It was broken. Now it works perfectly." I took a breath. "Some things can be fixed, Lorraine. Some relationships can be repaired. It just takes time and patience." She looked at me, understanding in her eyes. "Like us?" "Like us." I let her keep the watch. A gift, a symbol, a reminder that broken things don't have to stay broken. That evening I sat alone in my garage, surrounded by the soft ticking of 47 clocks. The Patek Philippe was gone now, but that was all right. It had served its purpose. Xavier Ferguson had learned an expensive lesson about judging people by appearances. He'd lost his company, his home, his marriage, and nearly his freedom. I didn't feel triumphant exactly. Satisfaction, maybe, the quiet satisfaction of a wrong righted, a clock restored to working order. Some people measure wealth in dollars and cars and square footage. I measure it differently. I measure it in the ability to protect the people I love, and the power to make those who hurt them understand exactly what they've done. The clocks ticked on, keeping perfect time, and I smiled. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.